My name is Brian Mitchell. I am 39 years old, and I have spent the last 15 years working as a surveyor in the construction industry. I have walked through forests and valleys across 3 states. I have hiked trails that most people only read about in guidebooks. I consider myself a man who understands nature, who respects it, and who does not fear it. This is important for you to understand before I tell you what happened during that summer in West Virginia. The whole thing started with Sharon Perez. She called me on a Tuesday in late June. Sharon is my sister-in-law, married to my brother for the past decade, though I do not see them often. She had a proposition for me, a group camping trip, 3 days in the wilderness of West Virginia, the Monongahela National Forest, to be specific. She wanted to gather a group of people, explore the mountain trails, spend time away from the cities and their noise and their constant demands. She said it would be therapeutic. She said we all needed it. I almost said no. My work schedule was packed, and I was tired, but she pressed, and I found myself agreeing. She mentioned that Kevin Roberts would be coming. Kevin is 74 years old now, a retired professor of environmental science. We had shared several drinks at holiday parties over the years, and I respected him. He knew the wilderness better than anyone I had ever met. Having him there made the trip feel safer somehow, more legitimate. The group would include 6 of us. Besides Sharon and Kevin and myself, there would be Michelle Turner, a high school teacher and a friend of Sharon's from their yoga class. There would be Edward Phillips, a retired military man in his 70s, thick and strong and quiet. And there was Laura Parker, a woman I had never met before, a friend of Michelle's who apparently loved hiking and spent most weekends on trails. Sharon sent me the details 2 weeks before we were scheduled to leave. The campsite was about 30 miles northeast of Grafton, West Virginia, a place called Devil's Notch. I had never heard of it before, which should have been my first warning. When I looked it up online, I found very little information. A few old hiking blogs mentioned it, a few outdated maps showed a trail system, but nothing definitive, nothing that made me feel confident about the location. It is off the beaten path, Sharon explained when I called her with concerns. That is the whole point. We want to get away from the crowds. There are crowds for a reason, I told her. Those places are maintained. There are rangers. There is cellular service. We are not bringing our phones anyway, she said. That is the whole point. No phones, no internet, no connection to the outside world for 3 days, just us and nature. I should have argued harder. I should have pushed back. But something in her voice told me this was important to her. So I agreed. I gathered my equipment, good boots, a waterproof tent, a sleeping bag rated for temperatures down to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, even though it was summer, a first aid kit, matches, a headlamp, plenty of rope. I was, after all, a man who understood preparation. I packed and repacked 3 times. Each time I told myself I was being overly cautious. Each time I added one more thing anyway, a larger knife than I normally carried, an additional liter of water purification tablets, a signal mirror, despite knowing that we had no way to reach anyone and no one knew exactly where we would be. The night before we left, I hardly slept. I lay in bed and thought about Devil's Notch. I thought about the darkness that exists in remote places. I thought about what it means to be truly alone, with no one able to reach you, no way to call for help if something went wrong. I did not know then that my fears were not about being alone. I did not know then that the real danger would not come from getting lost, or from weather, or from the usual threats of the wilderness. I did not know on that night before we left that something was already waiting for us, something that had been waiting in those mountains for decades, something that had been waiting since before most of us were born. The 6 of us met at a parking area about 5 miles south of Devil's Notch. It was early morning, barely 7 in the morning, and the sun was just beginning to burn through the mist that hung between the mountains. Kevin arrived first in his truck, pulling a small travel trailer. He got out and stretched, and I could see that he moved with the ease of a man half his age, despite the gray that now dominated his hair and beard. "Brian," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Good to see you. I brought extra topographic maps. These trails are old, and some of them are not well marked anymore." That was Kevin, always prepared, always thinking ahead. Sharon and Michelle arrived next, in Michelle's white SUV. Sharon is my sister-in-law, but looking at her that morning, I was reminded of how little I actually knew her. She had always seemed nervous at family gatherings, always seemed out of place. But out here, stepping out of the vehicle with her hiking boots and her weathered backpack, she looked comfortable, almost at peace. Michelle was younger than Sharon by several years, maybe early 40s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight braid. She moved with athletic efficiency, and I could see immediately why she and Sharon had become friends. They had a similar energy. Laura Parker arrived alone in a small sedan. She was older than I had expected, maybe 53 or 54, with silver streaking through her dark hair. She wore expensive hiking gear, the kind that looked like it had been tested on mountains far more challenging than any in West Virginia. But there was something about her that seemed off, some quality that I could not quite name. She smiled when she greeted us, but her eyes did not smile with her. They seemed to be looking past all of us, at something we could not see. Edward Phillips came last, parking an old Jeep that looked like it had been built in the 1970s. He was a large man, solid muscle and bone, with a military bearing that never quite left a person's shoulders even in retirement. He moved slowly, carefully, as though his body hurt, but his eyes were sharp and alert, and constantly scanning. "Everyone here?" Kevin asked, looking at his watch. 7:30 in the morning. "We want to reach the campsite before dusk. It is about 6 miles of hiking from the parking area, and the trail deteriorates as you go further in." "Deteriorates how?" Michelle asked. "Becomes less marked," Kevin said. "Eventually disappears entirely. That is why I brought the maps." We shouldered our backpacks and began walking. For the first 2 hours, the hike was pleasant. The trail was well defined, winding through deciduous forest that was lush with summer green. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts. We passed a small stream, crystal clear and cold, and Kevin pointed out the animal tracks along its banks. Deer, raccoon, something larger, he said, studying the prints carefully. Black bear, probably, but they would avoid us if we made noise. "That is the thing about wildlife," Kevin said as we walked. "Most of them do not want to encounter us any more than we want to encounter them. Make noise, let them know you are coming, and they will move away." Reassuring words, words that made sense, words that I held on to. By early afternoon, Laura had taken the lead. She was a faster hiker than the rest of us, and while Kevin seemed capable of keeping pace with her, the rest of us were falling behind. Edward moved with a slow, steady rhythm, his military training evident in his discipline. Sharon and Michelle hiked together, talking quietly. I found myself walking with Kevin, and we talked about his teaching career, about his retirement, about the places he had visited before settling in this area. "There is something about the mountains of Appalachia," Kevin said as we walked, "something that draws you. Not just the beauty, though there is certainly that, but something else, a sense of age, a sense of history. These mountains are very old, Brian, older than the Rocky Mountains, older than most people understand, and they carry the weight of that age with them." I remember thinking at the time that he sounded like a poet, not a scientist. But Kevin had always been like that, able to see the world through both the lens of data and the lens of wonder. "You ever heard of the Grafton Monster?" Kevin asked suddenly. I had not, but I had heard the name. I had seen it in the search results when I researched Devil's Notch, though I had not read those articles carefully. "Local folklore," Kevin continued. "There was a creature sighted in the 1960s near the town of Grafton, maybe 20 miles north of where we are now. Tall, reportedly around 9 feet, gray skin, unusual features. It was seen multiple times over several weeks, and then it disappeared. Most people dismissed it as a hoax, or a misidentification, or an urban legend that grew out of nothing. "You do not sound like you are most people," I said. Kevin smiled slightly. "I am not. I think there are things in these mountains that we do not understand. I think dismissing something as impossible just because it does not fit into our current understanding of biology is a form of arrogance. Nature is full of surprises, the wilderness especially." I should have asked him to elaborate. I should have pressed him on what he actually believed. But at that moment, I heard Laura call out from ahead of us. She had stopped on the trail, looking at something. When we caught up to her, she was studying the ground. There were marks in the mud of the trail, marks made by something large. Kevin crouched down, examining them with great care. The rest of us gathered around. "What are they?" Michelle asked. "Large animal," Kevin said slowly. "Very large. Black bear, most likely, or possibly a mountain lion, though we have not had a confirmed population of mountain lions in West Virginia for over 100 years. But he did not sound convinced. His usual confidence seemed to have wavered. "How recently?" Edward asked. His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. "Hours," Kevin said. "Maybe less." We did not talk much after that. We kept walking, though I noticed that everyone was more alert now. We made more noise. We called out to each other more frequently. Kevin picked up the pace. The trail began to deteriorate around 3 in the afternoon. The neat, well-maintained path gave way to a rougher track, marked only by orange blazes on the trees. Then the blazes became scarce. Then they disappeared entirely. Kevin consulted his maps. We pushed forward, Kevin navigating by topography and by landmarks that presumably made sense to him, though they seemed arbitrary to me. The forest had changed, too. The deciduous trees had given way to a mix of evergreens and hardwoods. The air felt different, cooler, damper, and there was a sound, a soft sound that I could not quite identify. It took me several minutes to realize what I was hearing. Water, a river or a large stream, somewhere nearby. We could not see it through the trees, but we could hear it, a constant rushing sound. "Devil's Notch," Kevin said, pointing downward with a tilt of his head. "The river cuts through a gorge down there. It is part of what makes this place so isolated." We were walking along the edge now, though the trees prevented us from seeing the gorge itself. I tried not to think about how easily someone could fall, how deep a drop there might be. By 4:30 in the afternoon, Kevin announced that we had reached the campsite. It was a small clearing, relatively flat, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded on 3 sides by dense forest. On the 4th side, the land dropped away sharply into the gorge. There was an old fire ring, blackened rocks arranged in a circle, suggesting that this place had been used before, probably many times. "This is it," Sharon said. Her voice sounded small in that place. "This is where we camp." As we began setting up tents, I noticed something. The forest around us had gone very quiet. No birds, no insects, no small rustling sounds of creatures moving through the underbrush, just silence, a thick, heavy silence that seemed to press down on all of us. "That is normal," Kevin said when I mentioned it to him quietly. "Animals go quiet when they sense unfamiliar presences. They will come back out once they become accustomed to us." But they never did. The silence persisted through the evening as we built a fire and cooked dinner. It persisted as we sat around the flames, talking quietly about mundane things. It persisted as darkness fell and we retreated to our tents. It was a silence that I would come to understand meant something very different than what Kevin had suggested. I did not sleep that first night. I lay in my tent, listening to that unnatural quiet, listening to the sound of the river below us, listening to the wind in the trees. Around me I could hear the small sounds of the others settling into sleep, the creak of tent fabric, the soft sounds of someone shifting in their sleeping bag, Michelle snoring softly from the tent next to mine. But there was something else. Something that came just after midnight, I think, though I could not be certain without a watch. A sound. a low sound, hard to describe, not quite a growl, not quite a howl, something between the two, something that did not sound like anything I had ever heard before. It lasted only a few seconds. Then it stopped. The silence returned. But the silence was different now. It was not the silence of a forest that had adjusted to our presence. It was the silence of a forest that was holding its breath. It was the silence of something waiting. I did not call out to the others. I did not wake anyone. I simply lay in my sleeping bag, heart pounding, wondering if I had imagined the sound, wondering if it had been the wind or the river or the product of my own paranoia. By morning, I had convinced myself that it was probably a coyote. There were coyotes in West Virginia. They made strange sounds sometimes. Certainly that was all it had been. But as I emerged from my tent into the gray morning light, I saw Kevin standing at the edge of the clearing, looking down into the gorge. His face was pale. His hands were shaking slightly. "You heard it too," he said when he saw me. It was not a question. The second day of the trip was when things began to unravel. Kevin announced that he wanted to explore further, to follow the old trail system deeper into the forest. Not everyone was enthusiastic about this. Michelle wanted to spend more time around camp. Edward wanted to rest, claiming that his knees were bothering him. Sharon was torn between her desire to push forward and her worry about the group splitting up. But Laura was adamant. She wanted to go deeper. She said that she had not come all this way to sit around a campfire. She said that true wilderness adventure required risk. Looking back now, I realized that Laura's enthusiasm was strange. She was not a young woman. She was experienced, yes, but that kind of eagerness, that kind of drive to push forward into unknown territory seemed unusual, but I did not recognize it as unusual at the time. I simply saw it as her personality. "We will go for just a few hours," Kevin said finally. "We will follow the trail system about 2 miles further north. We will turn back by 1 o'clock so that we can return to camp before dark." So 4 of us set out: Kevin, Laura, Sharon, and myself. Michelle and Edward chose to stay behind. The trail was even less distinct than the day before. Kevin had to consult his maps constantly. We were moving through terrain that had clearly not seen many visitors in a very long time. The vegetation was dense. Fallen logs crossed the path, and we had to climb over them or find ways around them. The air was getting colder. I realized that we had been hiking downward. The forest had descended into a valley, and I could hear the sound of the river more clearly now. We were getting closer to it. "Should we turn back?" Sharon asked. She was breathing hard, and I could see sweat on her forehead despite the cold. "It is already almost noon. 5 more minutes," Kevin said. "I want to see where this path leads." 5 minutes later, the trail opened into a clearing. And in that clearing, we found something that made our blood run cold. There was a dead elk. Not recently dead, but not so long dead that it was completely skeletal. The carcass was partially decomposed, and it was positioned in a way that seemed deliberately arranged. The legs were pulled back, the body splayed. It looked like something had killed the animal and then taken time to arrange it, to position it in some kind of specific way. But that was not the worst part. Around the clearing, on the trees, there were markings. Not random scratches, but deliberate marks, deep gouges in the bark, arranged in patterns. Some of them were old, the wood inside them darkened and weathered. Some of them were fresh, the exposed wood still pale and clean. "What is this?" Sharon whispered. Kevin did not answer immediately. He walked slowly around the clearing, studying the marks, studying the carcass. His face had gone very pale. "Territory markers," he said finally. "This is territory. Something is marking this as its territory." "Marking it how?" Laura asked. She seemed remarkably calm, I thought. Curious, but not frightened. "I do not know," Kevin said. "I have never seen anything like it. We should have left then." All of my instincts were screaming at me to turn around and get back to camp, but we did not. Instead, we stood in that clearing for several more minutes, looking at those marks, trying to understand what they meant. It was while we were standing there that I noticed something in the trees to our north. Movement. Just a flicker in my peripheral vision, visible only because I was already nervous, already alert. I looked directly at that spot, and it was gone, or it had never been there. I could not tell which. "We need to go back," I said. Now, no one argued with me. We turned around and started back the way we had come. The hike back took longer than the hike in. We were moving faster, less careful about where we were placing our feet. Laura was still in the lead, but Kevin had fallen back, and I realized that he was deliberately placing himself at the rear of the group, looking back constantly, alert. We were maybe a half-mile from camp when we heard the sound again. That same low growl howl that I had heard in the night. But this time, it was not distant. It was close, very close. We stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The sound came again, this time from multiple directions. Or so it seemed. It was hard to tell. Sound in a forest can be deceptive. It bounces off trees, echoes in unexpected ways. "Keep moving," Kevin said quietly. "Do not run. Just keep walking. Steady. Do not show fear. Something is hunting us," Sharon said. Her voice was shaking. "Keep moving," Kevin repeated. We did. We walked as quickly as we could without running, every sense hyper-alert, every nerve screaming. The forest felt suddenly hostile, the trees like walls closing in on us, the underbrush like something that could hide anything. We reached camp without incident, but as we broke into the clearing, I felt a strange sense of dread rather than relief. Because in camp, Edward was standing by the fire ring, holding a large piece of wood like a club, and Michelle was sitting on the ground, her face streaked with tears. "What happened?" Sharon demanded, rushing to Michelle. "There is something out there," Michelle said. Her voice was hoarse. "There is something out there in the forest." Michelle's story was this. While we were gone, she and Edward had remained in camp. They had sat by the fire, talking, keeping warm. But around noon, they had heard sounds coming from the forest around us. Not animal sounds, Michelle insisted. Something else. Something that paced around the clearing, staying just at the edge of the trees, staying just out of sight. Michelle said that she could hear something large moving through the underbrush, circling, circling, circling. She and Edward had retreated to the fire ring, as though the flames would provide some kind of protection. Edward had armed himself with a piece of wood. They had waited, watching the tree line, waiting for whatever it was to show itself. But it never did. Whatever was out there had remained hidden, hidden but present, hidden but clearly aware of them. After an hour or so, the sounds had stopped, but the presence remained. Michelle said that she could feel it, even after the sounds had ceased. She said that something was watching them from the forest. "You are sure?" Kevin asked. His voice was strange, strained. "Yes," Michelle said. "I am sure. There is something out there." Kevin exchanged a look with Edward, a look that contained some kind of understanding that I could not quite decipher. Edward nodded slowly. "We should leave," Kevin said. "We should pack up now and leave." "It is almost 4 o'clock, Sharon said. "We cannot hike out of here in the dark." "We have headlamps," Kevin said. "We have lights. We can navigate by those." "I am not hiking through these woods at night," Edward said. His voice was firm. "Not in this situation. We stay here, we stay alert, we stay together, and in the morning we leave." I could see Kevin wanting to argue, but he nodded. "All right," he said. "We stay the night, but we stay alert. We keep the fire burning. We take turns on watch." No one slept that second night. We sat around the fire, each of us lost in our own thoughts, each of us listening to the forest around us, the forest that had gone quiet again, the forest that was waiting. The night stretched on for an eternity. Around 2 a.m, Laura stood up abruptly and walked away from the fire. She walked toward the edge of the clearing, toward the trees. "Where are you going?" Sharon asked. I need to urinate, Laura said. I will be right back. I will come with you, I said. That is not necessary, Laura said. She continued walking toward the trees. I should have insisted. I should have followed her. I should have done many things differently, but I did not. I sat by the fire and waited for her to return. She never did. We waited for 5 minutes, then 10, then 15. By then, all of us were standing, alarmed. Laura, Kevin called out. Laura, where are you? No response. We called again. Nothing. Edward was the one who found her. Or rather, Edward found her things. Her backpack, left at the edge of the clearing, just inside the tree line. Her shoes, placed neatly beside it, as though she had removed them deliberately. But no Laura. She is out there, Michelle whispered. She walked into the forest. She would not do that deliberately, Sharon said, but her voice was uncertain. We searched around the clearing for the next hour. We called her name. We searched with our headlamps, lighting up the forest around us. Nothing. She had simply vanished. By 4 a.m, Kevin made a decision. We are leaving, he said. Now. We are leaving right now. It did not take us long to gather our things. In our panic and our fear, we simply threw everything into our backpacks without care for organization. We left the tents standing. We left the fire ring. We took only what we could carry and what we absolutely needed. As we prepared to leave, Edward did something that seemed odd at the time. He walked to the edge of the clearing, the edge closest to the gorge, and he threw something into the darkness below. I thought it was a rock, but it was not. It was Laura's shoes. What are you doing? I asked. Edward did not answer. He simply gestured for us to start walking. We hiked through the darkness, guided by our headlamps. Kevin consulted his maps, using landmarks that he could somehow identify even in the dark. We moved quickly, too quickly for safety, but no one cared about safety anymore. We only cared about getting out, and there were sounds that followed us as we moved through the forest, sounds that sometimes seemed to be from above us, as though something were moving through the trees overhead, sounds that sometimes seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Once, I turned around and saw something, a shape, large and dark and moving between the trees behind us. It was there for only a moment, visible only because of the way my headlamp briefly illuminated it. But I saw it. I saw enough to know that whatever Michelle and Edward had heard during the day, whatever had circled the camp, it was real. It was following us. I said nothing. I simply kept moving. The hike out took us all night. By the time we reached the parking area, the sun was beginning to rise. The parking area where we had left our vehicles, where the world of civilization began, felt like it was on another planet entirely. We got into the vehicles without speaking. Kevin drove. I sat in the passenger seat. In the back, Sharon was crying. Michelle was staring out the window, her face blank. Edward was in his own vehicle, following behind us. As Kevin pulled onto the road, I looked back at the trailhead, at the forest beyond it. I thought about Laura. I thought about what might have happened to her. And for just a moment, I thought I saw something emerge from the forest. A shape. Tall and dark and impossibly large. It stood at the edge of the parking area, watching us leave. But when I turned my head to look at it directly, it was gone. 3 days later, the police found Laura Parker. Or rather, they found part of her. Her body was discovered on a rock outcropping on the banks of the Devil's Notch River, approximately a quarter-mile downstream from where we had camped. She had fallen, the official report stated, from the high cliffs above. She had been dead for at least 36 hours. The injuries were consistent with a fall of significant height. Those were the facts as presented by the authorities. Those were the facts that appeared in the newspapers. Those were the facts that made everyone who had been on that trip nod and agree and accept the explanation, because the alternative was unthinkable. But I knew what I had seen. We all knew, though none of us spoke about it directly. We spoke around it, we implied it, we hinted at it, but none of us said the truth out loud. The truth was too strange. The truth was too impossible. The morning after we returned, Kevin came to my house. He looked like he had not slept. He probably had not. We sat in my kitchen, and he told me things that he had not told the police. "The thing you saw at the parking area," he said. "Was it the only time you saw it clearly?" "Yes," I said. "I saw shapes. I heard sounds. But that was the only time I saw it properly. Just for a moment." Kevin nodded slowly. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Inside were documents, newspaper clippings mostly, old newspaper clippings dating back to the 1960s. "The Grafton Monster," he said. "I researched it extensively after I started teaching at the university here. I became fascinated by it. I found more reports than I had expected, people who had seen it, people who had encountered it." He spread the clippings across my kitchen table. "Grafton, West Virginia, 1966, he read. "Multiple sightings over the course of several weeks. Approximately 9 feet tall, grayish skin, unusual features." The sightings stopped abruptly in late autumn. No explanation was ever provided. He showed me more clippings, more sightings, not just in Grafton, but in other parts of West Virginia. The sightings formed a pattern, he claimed, a pattern that suggested the creature, if it existed, moved between certain territories, certain remote territories, certain places where people rarely ventured. "Devil's Notch is one of those territories," Kevin said. He pointed to a map that he had created, with marks and notations scrawled across it in his own handwriting. "Look at the sightings. Look at where they occurred. There is a corridor, a path that the creature seems to follow. Devil's Notch is on that path." "You knew," I said. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. "You knew this before we went." Kevin did not deny it. He simply looked down at the table. "I suspected," he said. "I thought it was folklore. I thought it was legend. I did not really believe that there was something out there. I thought that even if there was, something that old, something that legendary, would avoid people if given the chance." "But you were wrong," I said. "Yes," Kevin said quietly. "I was wrong." I asked him what he thought had happened to Laura. He did not answer directly. Instead, he asked me a question. "Did you find it strange," he said, "that Laura wanted to lead every hike? That she wanted to go further into the forest? That she seemed so eager?" "Now that you mention it," I said slowly. "Yes. She did seem to push for that. She seemed to want to get deeper into the wilderness. And it did not strike you as odd that she had no fear, that nothing seemed to disturb her." I thought about that, about Laura's calmness when we found the elk carcass, about her curiosity about the marks on the trees, about how she had walked into the forest alone at 2 in the morning, without hesitation, without fear. "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "I am not sure," Kevin said, "but I have a theory, and I think you need to hear it." His theory was this: the creature, whatever it was, whatever it is, possesses some kind of ability that we do not understand, an ability to influence, an ability to attract, possibly an ability to manipulate behavior. Laura's enthusiasm, her eagerness to push deeper, her lack of fear in the face of danger, these could have been signs that she had been influenced, that some part of her consciousness had been reached by the creature in a way that we could not see or detect. She had walked into the forest at 2 in the morning because something was calling to her. She had been drawn out, and once she was out, once she was away from the safety of the fire and the group, she had been vulnerable. "But the report said she fell," I said. "The coroner said she died from injuries consistent with a fall." "Yes," Kevin said, "she did fall, from a great height. But who is to say she was climbing? Who is to say she did not simply walk off a cliff?" The implications of that statement hung between us. "You think it made her jump?" I said. "I think it is possible," Kevin said. "I think the creature has abilities we do not understand. I think it can lure people. I think it can influence them. I think it used those abilities to separate Laura from the group." "Then why let us leave?" I asked. "Why did it let the rest of us escape?" Kevin was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe it did not want all of us," he said finally. Maybe it chose Laura for a reason. Maybe the presence of the group was too much. Maybe it could only claim one. I did not know what to say to that. I did not know how to respond to the idea that we had been hunted, selected from, that one of us had been chosen to be taken. There is something else, Kevin said. He pulled out one more document. This one was handwritten, in an older man's neat script, a letter. I found this in the archives at the university, a letter written in 1968 by a doctor, Raymond Jacobs, who was one of the researchers who investigated the Grafton monster sightings in the 1960s. He handed me the letter. I read it slowly. The creature is not necessarily hostile, the letter stated. We have gathered testimony from several individuals who claim to have seen it. While all accounts describe fear and panic, we have found no confirmed cases of fatal human encounters. It is possible that the creature, like many animals, avoids humans when possible. However, it is also possible that the creature is selective in its predation. It may hunt humans only under specific circumstances. The motivations for such selectivity remain unknown. The letter continued. Most disturbing is the testimony of family members of 3 individuals who went missing near the Grafton area during the period of increased sightings. These family members report that the missing individuals had been acting strangely in the weeks before their disappearance. They had expressed unusual interest in remote locations. They had begun keeping journals documenting their desire to venture into the wilderness. One mother reported that her son spoke of hearing voices, though he could not articulate what the voices were saying. In all 3 cases, the missing persons eventually disappeared into the forest and were never found. We cannot confirm whether their disappearance was related to the creature or to the creature's influence. I lowered the letter and looked at Kevin. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because I think we are in danger, Kevin said. Because I think the creature that took Laura is aware of us, and I think it is possible that it may attempt to claim another one of us. That is insane, I said. That is absolutely insane. Is it? Kevin asked. You saw something at the parking area. We all felt something in that forest. We all heard things that we cannot explain. Is what I am saying really more insane than what we experienced? I had no answer to that. Over the next few weeks, I paid close attention to the other members of our group. I watched for signs of strangeness. I watched for signs of influence. Edward changed first. 3 weeks after we returned, Sharon called me and said that Edward had disappeared. He had left his house early in the morning, leaving a note that said only, "I need to walk." He had not returned by evening. The police searched for him. They found him, eventually, 2 days later, walking along a trail about 15 miles outside of town. He claimed not to remember why he had left or where he had been. He claimed the last thing he remembered clearly was waking up that morning, and then nothing until a park ranger had found him on the trail. The doctors examined him. They found nothing wrong with him. No drugs in his system. No signs of injury or abuse. Just an absence. A gap in his memory that he could not account for. After that incident, Edward seemed different. More withdrawn. He moved more slowly, as though his body was heavy. Sharon said that he slept constantly, that he could barely stay awake for more than a few hours at a time. Michelle began receiving calls. She described them to me. Calls from numbers that did not exist. Calls where no one spoke, but where she could hear breathing. Heavy breathing. And in the background of the calls, sounds. Sounds like wind through trees. Sounds like water running. Sounds like the forest. The calls came at all hours, day and night. Sometimes just once. Sometimes multiple times an hour. She changed her phone number 3 times, but the calls continued. The company she worked for noticed a change in her. She became less engaged in her teaching. She took time off. She told people that she was having trouble sleeping. Sharon started to forget things, small things at first. She would go into a room and forget why she was there. She would start to say something and forget what she was saying mid-sentence. But it progressed. She started to forget larger things. She forgot her children's birthdays. She forgot how to spell words that she had known her whole life. She began to withdraw from her husband, spending entire days staring out the window, not responding when he spoke to her. Kevin called me with updates. He seemed to be tracking our condition like some kind of scientist monitoring an experiment. His voice grew more urgent with each call. "It is not done with us," he said during one of those calls. "The creature. It is not done with us. It is still reaching out. It is still trying." "What does it want?" I asked. "I do not know," Kevin said. "Maybe it wants all of us. Maybe it is patient. Maybe it can wait as long as necessary." "So what do we do?" I asked. Kevin did not have an answer to that either. I began to notice changes in myself around week 5. It started with dreams, vivid, intense dreams that I could remember in perfect detail upon waking. Dreams in which I was walking through the forest at Devil's Notch. But the forest was different in the dreams. It was vast, impossibly vast. It stretched on forever in all directions, the trees taller than any trees should be, the canopy so thick that no light penetrated it. And I was being hunted in these dreams. I knew it. I could feel something moving through the forest, circling me, getting closer. I could hear sounds, strange sounds, sounds like nothing I had ever heard when I was awake. And I was running, always running, and never getting any closer to escape. Then I started having the dreams while I was awake. I would be sitting at my desk at work, and I would find my mind wandering. And when it wandered, it would find itself back in that vast forest. I would have to force myself back to the present moment, back to whatever task I was supposed to be working on. At first it happened once or twice a day. Then it was constant. I could barely maintain focus on anything. I would start reading something and realize, a few paragraphs in, that I had no idea what I had just read. My boss noticed. He asked if I was feeling all right. I told him I was fine. I was not fine. By week 6, I had started taking walks at night, long walks through the residential streets of my neighborhood. I did not know why I was doing it. I did not consciously decide to do it. I would simply find myself at my door, putting on my jacket, stepping out into the darkness, and I would walk, for hours sometimes. I would walk, and I would not come back to full consciousness until I was blocks away from my house, confused about how I had gotten there. One night I found myself at the trailhead to Devil's Notch. I did not remember driving there. I did not remember the drive at all. But I was there, standing in the darkness at the edge of the parking area, looking at the trail that led into the forest, and I could hear something calling to me. It was not a voice, not exactly. It was more like a sensation, a pull, a deep, overwhelming desire to step onto that trail and walk into the darkness and keep walking. My hands were shaking. I was sweating, despite the cool night air. Every part of me wanted to take that first step onto the trail. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to obey the pull. But some part of me resisted. Some part of me fought back against the influence. Some part of me was still Brian Mitchell, the man who was a surveyor, the man who understood preparation and safety. And that part of me got me back to my car. That part of me drove me away from that place. I drove directly to Kevin's house. It was nearly 2 in the morning. But Kevin was awake. He was in his study, surrounded by books, surrounded by maps, surrounded by his research on the creature. He took one look at my face and knew immediately what had happened. "It has you," he said simply. "How do I stop it?" I asked. My voice was shaking as much as my hands. Kevin did not answer immediately. He walked to a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a key. From the drawer, he took a small wooden box. Inside the box were several objects: a piece of obsidian stone, dark and sharp, a bundle of dried herbs tied with twine, a journal, old and leather-bound. "These belong to Dr. Jacobs," Kevin said, "the researcher who wrote that letter. I found them in the university archives, and I took them. I knew, even then, that I might need them." He handed me the journal. Inside, in careful script, Jacobs had documented his research on the creature. Not just the sightings, but the phenomenon surrounding it, the influence it could exert, the way it seemed to call to certain people. But there was more. Jacobs had theories about how to resist it. He wrote of the indigenous peoples who had lived in this region long before European settlement. He wrote of the stories they told about creatures in the wilderness. He wrote of protective rituals, of ways to shield the mind from external influence. None of it is proven, Kevin said. Jacobs was not sure if any of it worked, but he experimented, and he documented the results. Some of his subjects reported diminishment of symptoms. Some reported complete remission. "What are these subjects?" I asked, pointing to a passage in the journal. Kevin did not answer. "What did he do to them?" I pressed. "Experimental therapies," Kevin said vaguely. "Some successful, some not." I read further in the journal and found Jacob's notes on the treatment regimen. The herbs were to be burned, the smoke inhaled. The stone was to be carried at all times, kept in contact with the skin if possible. The journal itself was to be read daily, especially the passages that Jacobs had marked as affirmations of will and resistance. "It sounds like nonsense," I said. "Probably it is," Kevin agreed. "But what else do we have?" I began the rituals that night. I burned the herbs in my kitchen, breathing in the bitter smoke. I tucked the obsidian stone into my pocket, where it rested against my leg, a constant point of contact, a constant reminder that I was still in control of my own mind. And I read from Jacob's journal, passages about will, passages about the strength of the human mind, passages about the power of consciousness to resist external forces. "I am not a creature of the forest," one passage read. "I am not subject to the will of what dwells therein. I am myself. I am my own. My mind belongs to me, and I will not surrender it." I read these words over and over. I said them aloud to the empty rooms of my house. I said them before I went to sleep. I said them when I woke up, and slowly, gradually, the pull began to diminish. The urge to walk into the forest became less overwhelming. The dreams, while they did not stop entirely, became less vivid, less immediate, less real. By week 8, I could go an entire day without thinking about Devil's Notch. By week 10, I could go 2 days. I shared the journal with the others. Kevin took the other copy of Jacob's research materials that he had kept locked away. We distributed them. The herbs, the stones, the journal, the affirmations. Edward regained his memories. He could not explain what had happened to him, but the blankness cleared from his eyes. He began to engage with the world again. Michelle's phone calls stopped. She did not know when they ended. Just that one day she realized she had not received one in a week, then 2 weeks. Then they simply did not come anymore. Sharon's memory improved. Her clarity returned. Her husband said that she was more like herself than she had been in years. But the thing we did not say, the thing we all knew but did not voice, was that the influence was not gone. It was merely dormant. It was merely waiting. We had not defeated it. We had simply resisted it, and there was a difference. I am writing this account exactly 1 year after we left Devil's Notch. 1 year to the day. I am writing it because I feel the pull returning, and I do not know how much longer I will be able to resist it. The pull has been building for the past month. It started subtly, the way it did before. A stray thought about the forest, a dream that lingers after waking, the feeling of something just at the edge of perception, trying to reach me, trying to break through the barriers that I have constructed with Jacob's rituals and his research and his herbs and his stones. But it is growing stronger. I can feel it, and I think I know why. Kevin is missing. He disappeared 3 days ago. He left his house, and he has not come back. The police are searching, but they will not find him. I know they will not find him because I know where he is. He is in the forest. He is back at Devil's Notch, and this time he went willingly. I only understood what had happened when I read his letter. It arrived at my house the day after he disappeared. I do not know how he sent it, or from where, but it was his handwriting. "I am going back," the letter stated. "I am going back to the forest, back to that place, back to the thing that dwells there. I have spent the past year trying to resist, trying to fight, trying to maintain my separation from what happened that day. But I have realized that I was wrong. Resistance is futile. Resistance only prolongs the suffering. The creature is not cruel. It is simply trying to bring us back. It is trying to complete what it started. And I think I understand why now. I think I understand what it wants. The letter continued. There are old stories, very old stories, from the indigenous peoples who lived in these mountains long before we arrived. Stories of a being that has lived in the wilderness for thousands of years, a being that is neither animal nor human, a being that exists in a state that we do not have words for. And these stories say that the being is lonely, that it has watched humans come and go, watched the forests transform, watched the mountains age, and it has become lonely. So it calls out. It calls out to humans, draws them into the forest, and tries to make them understand, tries to make them stay, tries to end its isolation. I think Laura understood this, the letter continued. I think, when the creature called to her, she heard not a predator, but a voice in the darkness, a voice that had been alone for longer than any of us can comprehend. I think she chose to go to it. I think she chose to answer the call. I am going back because I think Kevin understood. I am going back because I think the only way to truly be free of what happened is to go back to where it began. I am going back to listen to what the voice in the forest wants to tell me, and I will not be coming back again. The letter was signed simply, Kevin. I have read the letter a dozen times. I have tried to find flaws in Kevin's logic, holes in his reasoning, but I cannot, because I think he is right. And more importantly, I think the creature knows he is right, and I think it is using his understanding, his acceptance, to call to the rest of us. The pull is stronger every day now, every hour. I can feel it like a physical thing, like a hand reaching inside my chest and squeezing my heart. It is telling me that resistance is futile. It is telling me that I should simply go back to that place, simply walk into the forest, simply surrender to what wants me. And the worst part is that some part of me wants to obey. Some part of me is tired of fighting. Some part of me is curious about what it would be like to simply accept the call, to stop resisting, to give in. I do not know how much longer I can maintain this barrier. I do not know how many more rituals I will need to perform before they stop working. But I wanted to document this. I wanted to make a record of what happened. Because I think that when I finally give in, when I finally walk back into those mountains, someone should know the truth. Someone should know what really happened at Devil's Notch. Someone should know that we were not attacked by a mindless monster. Someone should know that we were encountered by something that was trying, in its own way, to communicate, to connect, to ease the burden of its own terrible, endless loneliness. Someone should know that the creature did not kill Laura. It only invited her to stay. And someone should know that for a being that has lived for thousands of years in the darkness of those mountains, a being that has never had another like itself to share its existence, the simple act of inviting someone to remain, the simple act of finding one human who would choose to answer its call rather than flee in terror, must have felt like a kind of grace. I leave this account here with this warning. Do not go to Devil's Notch. Do not walk the trails of the Monongahela National Forest in that region. Do not venture into the mountains between Grafton and those remote places where the maps end and the old trails disappear into the undergrowth. Because if you do, you may hear a voice that is not quite a voice, a presence that is not quite a presence, something calling to you from the darkness between the trees. And if you hear it, you must understand what it is calling you toward. It is not destruction. It is not predation. It is not malice. It is loneliness. It is isolation. It is a thing so old and so alone that it cannot help but reach out to the brief, bright lives of humans, hoping that perhaps this time, just this once, it might not be rejected. I do not know what will happen when I finally return to Devil's Notch. I do not know what answers I will find in that vast and ancient wilderness, but I know that I will return. The pull is too strong now. The resistance is crumbling. Kevin understood. And soon, I think I will too. The creature is waiting. It has always been waiting, and perhaps, in the end, that is the only real truth about the thing that dwells in the mountains of West Virginia. It is simply waiting. Waiting for someone to answer its call. Waiting for someone to understand. Waiting for the loneliness to end. I do not know if that will be me, but I am beginning to suspect it might be. My name is Brian Mitchell. I am 39 years old, and this is my account of what happened in Devil's Notch, West Virginia. It is also, I suspect, goodbye. In the months following Brian Mitchell's statement, authorities conducted extensive searches of the Devil's Notch region and the surrounding forest. No bodies were found. No additional evidence of foul play was uncovered. The death of Laura Parker was officially ruled an accidental fall, and the case was closed. Brian Mitchell was never found. After submitting his account, he ceased all contact with family and friends. His home was discovered empty. His car was later found parked at the same trailhead where he had gone in the middle of the night. Edward Phillips passed away 2 years after the original camping trip, of what doctors described as progressive neurological deterioration. He never regained any memories beyond a certain point. Michelle Turner moved out of state. She maintains contact with no one from the group. Those who have attempted to reach out to her report that she refuses to discuss the camping trip or Devil's Notch. Sharon Perez experienced a complete mental breakdown 3 years after the trip. She is currently institutionalized. She speaks constantly of voices in the forest. She writes obsessively in journals, documenting conversations with the one who waits in the darkness. Her writing is coherent but increasingly difficult to follow as her entries progress. Kevin Roberts was never found. The forest at Devil's Notch remains largely unchanged. Hikers occasionally report unusual sounds in that region. A few have reported sightings of something large moving between the trees at dawn or dusk, but most visitors to the area report nothing unusual. Most leave satisfied that they have encountered nothing more than a remote and beautiful wilderness. But if you listen carefully, if you walk far enough into those mountains, if you venture deep enough into the forest where the marked trails end and the old paths disappear into the undergrowth, you might hear something, a sound that is not quite a voice, a presence that is not quite a presence, something calling, calling, calling across the vast stretch of years, something very old, something very alone, something that is always waiting for the next person to answer. My name is Stephen Rivera. I am 56 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life working in accounting. Numbers make sense to me. Equations balance. There is order in mathematics, but there is no order in what happened to us during that final week of July in West Virginia. There is only silence now where there should be understanding. We had planned this hiking expedition for months, 6 of us. I remember the morning we gathered at the trailhead near the Braxton County wilderness. The sun was already climbing high, burning off the early mist that hung in the valley like something alive. Matthew Adams stood by his truck, checking our supplies for the 3rd time. He was obsessive about these things, 37 years old and still possessed that restless energy of younger men. Emily Baker was his sister. She had driven up from Charleston with supplies and enthusiasm that felt almost frantic in retrospect. 33, athletic, always smiling, always talking. Sandra Nelson arrived in an old sedan that had seen better days. She was 62, recently retired from teaching, and determined to prove that age was merely a number. She kept saying that. Age is merely a number. I wonder if she still believes that now. Beside her came George Hill, 74 years old, Sandra's older brother. George walked with a slight limp from a hunting accident decades prior, but he moved with the confidence of someone who had traversed these mountains his entire life. Angela Campbell was the last to arrive, 44, divorced, wearing new hiking gear that still had price tags attached. She had joined our group through a Facebook page. None of us knew her well. In hindsight, I realize how little we actually knew about anyone in that group. We were strangers bound by a shared desire to escape our ordinary lives. The trail was marked. The park rangers had assured us it was well-traveled. Thousands of people hiked through this area every year without incident. That was what they told us. People did not return home and stop talking about the things they had seen. People went hiking and came back unchanged. The first 2 days were perfect. The weather held. The sky remained clear. We hiked through forests where the canopy was so dense that midday felt like twilight. The air smelled of rotting leaves and damp earth. Sandra kept pointing out bird species. George told stories about hunting trips from his youth. Angela mostly kept quiet, photographing everything on her phone, though I wondered who she was taking pictures for. There was no signal out here. There was nothing out here except trees and sky and the endless sound of our footsteps on the path. On the evening of the second day, we made camp at Bear Hollow. It was a designated camping area, though I used the term loosely. It was simply a clearing where others had set up tents before. There were fire rings from previous campers. There were remnants of rope tied to trees. There was the faint smell of abandoned human presence. Matthew and Emily set up one tent. Angela set up another. Sandra and George shared the largest tent, being siblings. I set up my own personal shelter, small and efficient, near the edge of our makeshift camp. The fire that night was warmer than necessary. It was July. The temperature had not dropped below 65 degrees, but we all felt the need for that fire. We sat around it in a circle, passing around a bottle of whiskey that Matthew had brought. George told another story about his hunting days. This one was about a bear he had tracked for 3 days through these very mountains. He said the bear had sensed him, had known he was being hunted. He said the bear had led him in circles, deliberately, as if teaching him a lesson about arrogance. I remember asking George if he had ever shot the bear. He said that he had not. He said that the bear had won. When George finished the story, he looked into the fire and did not look away. None of us questioned what he meant by winning. Sandra fell asleep early, her head tilted back against the log. Emily and Angela spoke in low voices about jobs they disliked and relationships that had failed. Matthew mostly drank and stared at the darkness beyond our fire. I sat there and listened to all of it, and I felt the wrongness starting to settle into my chest like something physical taking up residence. Around 2 a.m, I woke up in my tent. There was no external stimulus that roused me. I simply opened my eyes, completely alert, with the sensation that something was watching the camp. I unzipped my tent slowly, quietly, and looked out into the night. The fire had burned down to embers. The moon was 3/4 full, large and pale and wrong. In that moonlight, I could see our camp. Matthew was still sitting outside his tent. He was staring toward the forest, toward a section of tree line where the darkness seemed absolute. I never went back to sleep. I sat in my tent, watching through the gap in the zipper as Matthew remained motionless until dawn. When the sun finally began to rise, he went into his tent as if nothing unusual had happened. No one spoke of it when we broke camp that morning. The third day is when the trail ended, or rather, the marked trail ended. George assured us that he knew an alternate route through the mountains, a shortcut he had taken years before. We were making good time, he said. We could reach the valley on the far side by tomorrow evening if we took his route, a full day ahead of schedule. Angela asked if the route was marked. George said that it was marked in his memory. Matthew looked at Emily. Emily looked at Sandra. Sandra looked at me. No one looked at George, but we followed him anyway because that is what people do. They follow those who sound most certain, even when certainty is nothing more than performance. The forest changed when we left the marked trail. The trees became larger, older, more densely packed. The canopy closed in so completely that we had to use flashlights at midday. The air grew colder. There was no bird sound, which I did not register as unusual until much later. I should have noticed. There should have been bird sound. George led us down into a ravine. The path was barely visible, more assumption than actual trail. Roots protruded from the earth like skeletal fingers. Loose stone threatened to turn our ankles with every step. Sandra was struggling. I could see it in how carefully she placed each foot. George occasionally offered his hand, and she took it, her face tight with concentration. It was Angela who first mentioned the smell. She stopped walking and sniffed the air, her head tilted back like an animal catching a scent. She said something smelled wrong, not like typical forest, something chemical, something burning, but not quite. George said it was probably an old fire. Forest fires burned all through these mountains. The smell lingered for years. We did not encounter any burned area. We did not see any evidence of fire, but we smelled it more intensely as we descended deeper into the ravine. That chemical burning smell became almost overwhelming. It made my throat feel tight. It made my eyes water. Matthew asked George where exactly we were. He asked it calmly, but I heard the edge underneath, the steel core of concern disguised as casual inquiry. George did not answer immediately. He stopped on the trail and looked around, and for the first time I saw doubt cross his face. Real, undeniable doubt. George said that the terrain looked different than he remembered. The ravine seemed deeper. The vegetation seemed more dense, but he was certain we were going in the right direction. Mountains shifted perspective. What appeared to be one thing could be another from a different angle. We simply needed to keep moving forward. We kept moving forward. We had no other choice. The ravine behind us was as disorienting as the ravine ahead. Turning back seemed as dangerous as continuing. So we continued. That night we made camp in the ravine. There was nowhere else to stop. The walls of the canyon rose up around us, steep and impossible to climb. We had water from a stream that ran through the center of the ravine. We had food in our packs. We set up our tents in a tight cluster, closer together than we had done in Bear Hollow. No one slept that night either. Or if they did not speak of it afterward. Around 3 in the morning, we heard the sound. It came from high on the ravine wall, from somewhere up in the darkness above us. It was not quite a scream. It was not quite any sound I had ever heard before. It was like the sound of wind, but shaped by something intelligent. Shaped by something that was deliberately creating that sound to communicate something to us. The sound lasted perhaps 20 seconds. Then it stopped, and the silence that followed felt like a judgment. Angela came out of her tent and asked if anyone else had heard it. We all had. We all admitted it in quiet voices. Emily said it was probably an animal, a mountain lion or a bear, disturbed by our presence. We should make noise, she suggested. We should let it know we were here and that we were dangerous. George said that the sound had not come from an animal. When Emily asked how he could possibly know that, George did not answer. He simply looked up at the ravine wall, stared at the absolute darkness above us, and said that he knew. We built up the fire. We piled wood on top of wood until the flames climbed 3 feet high. The heat was intense. Sweat ran down my face despite the cold that seemed to emanate from the ravine walls. We sat around that fire and watched the forest, all of us waiting for dawn, as if it were a reprieve instead of simply another day. The smell grew worse as the night progressed. That chemical, burning smell. It became thick enough to taste. It became so intense that Angela began to gag. She moved to the stream and drank, trying to wash the taste from her mouth. When she returned to the fire, her lips were pale. When the sun finally rose, the relief was almost painful. We packed our camp with efficiency born of desperation. George said we should move quickly. The ravine path widened ahead. There was a plateau at the top where we could see for miles. Once we reached the plateau, we could get our bearings. Once we could see the land around us, everything would make sense again. It took us 4 hours to climb out of that ravine. 4 hours of steep inclines and loose stone, and the constant chemical smell growing somehow even stronger as we ascended. My legs burned. My lungs felt too small for the air I needed. Sandra fell twice. George helped her up both times, and both times I saw something like resignation in his eyes. When we finally reached the top of the plateau, we understood why George's memory of this route had been so flawed. The plateau was wrong. It was not a plateau at all. It was a wide depression, a bowl in the landscape, and in the center of that bowl was the remains of something. It looked like a crashed aircraft, or it looked like someone had imagined a crashed aircraft and then carved it out of stone. It did not have the right proportions. Nothing about it looked quite real. The hull, if you could call it that, was wrong. The angles were angles that hurt to look at, and it was the source of the smell, that chemical, burning, absolutely wrongness pouring out of the ground in waves. Emily asked what it was. Her voice was very small. George said that it was nothing. He said it was a natural formation. He said it was something that looked like one thing from below and something else from above, a trick of perspective and light. None of us believed him. Matthew took out his phone to take a picture. The phone died immediately. Its battery drained from 0 to nothing in the moment he turned it on. He tried again. It was completely dead. Emily's phone was dead. Angela's phone was dead. My phone would not even turn on. Only Sandra's ancient flip phone, which was nearly out of battery before we started this journey, continued to show a faint glimmer of life. We stood there in that bowl in the landscape, staring at the wrong thing in the earth, and I felt the ground shifting under my understanding of reality. This was not possible. This was not something that should exist, but it did. It existed in a way that was undeniable and terrifying. George said we needed to move around the bowl. We could not cross directly over the wreckage. We needed to follow the edge of the plateau and find a way down on the far side. It was longer, but it was the only way that made sense. As we began to walk, Angela looked back at the wreckage in the center of the bowl. She stopped walking. She pointed. Something was standing on top of the wreckage. It had not been there moments before. I was certain of it. We had all looked at the wreckage. None of us would have missed something standing on top of it, but there it was. At first I thought it was a person. It was roughly humanoid in shape, tall, very tall. Then my eyes adjusted and I understood that it was not a person. It was not anything that should exist in the world we believed we lived in. It had a head that seemed too large for its body, pointed upward in a way that was anatomically impossible. The proportions were all wrong. The limbs were too long and too thin, and the eyes, even from that distance, I could see the eyes. They glowed red in the afternoon light. Not reflected red, not the red of something catching the sun, the red of something that generated its own light, the red of something intelligent and aware and utterly alien. Emily screamed. It was a high, sharp sound that echoed across the plateau. George grabbed her arm and pulled her forward, back toward the path. Matthew grabbed Sandra. Angela was already running. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at the thing that was standing on the wreckage, staring back at me with those eyes. Then I ran. We ran along the edge of that plateau like prey animals fleeing from a predator. We did not look back. We could hear something following us. Not running, not moving in any way that made sound. But the presence of it was there, like the weight of eyes on your back, like the knowledge that you are being hunted. The path descended from the plateau in a switchback that seemed to go on forever. My legs were screaming. My lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. But we ran. We descended. We fled from that bowl in the landscape, and the thing that stood upon it, watching us with those red eyes. We did not make camp that night. We walked through the darkness, moving forward by memory and instinct, putting distance between ourselves and what we had seen. We moved through the night and did not stop when the sun rose. We moved through the next day and did not stop. It took us 8 hours to reach the road, 8 hours of walking in a state that was something between panic and dissociation. When we finally saw the access road, When we finally saw the park ranger station ahead of us, we nearly collapsed. A ranger named David met us at the station. He said we looked terrible. He offered us water and first aid. He asked if we needed to file a report. Matthew said that we just wanted to leave. We wanted to get out of those mountains and not come back. As we were leaving, George pulled me aside. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said something that I have thought about every single day since that moment. George said that the thing we saw on that wreckage was not new to those mountains. It had been there for a very long time. It had been there when he had come through as a young man. It had been there long before that, and it would be there long after we were gone. He said that it was old. He said that it was patient. And he said that the worst part was that it was curious about us. It wanted to know what we were. It wanted to understand human beings. He said that meant it would be back. It would keep coming back. It would keep looking until it understood completely, until there was nothing left of us to understand. I asked George if he was saying that the thing was hunting us, that it had been hunting us since we left the marked trail. George did not answer. He simply looked back toward the mountains, toward the wilderness we had fled from, and he nodded once. When I got home to my apartment in Charleston, I locked all my doors. I checked the locks repeatedly. I put furniture against the doors. I do not know what I was protecting myself against. I do not know if locking doors would stop something like that. I do not know if anything would stop it. I have not spoken to the others since that day. Emily sent me an email saying that she could not talk about it. The details of that experience were something she wanted to put behind her. She said that the more she talked about it, the more real it became. I understood exactly what she meant. I called George's house once, Sandra answered. She said that George had moved to a different state. He did not want to be in West Virginia anymore. He did not want to be close to those mountains. She said that George barely slept now. When he did sleep, he had nightmares about eyes that glowed red and watched him from the darkness. Matthew died. I learned about it from a news report. Car accident on Route 77. Single vehicle. He had driven his truck into a ravine in the early morning hours. The police said he must have fallen asleep at the wheel. I do not believe he fell asleep. I believe he was driving in the dark, concentrating on the road ahead, when he saw something in the shadows that made him lose control. I believe that thing is still watching, still hunting, still curious about us. Angela Campbell disappeared. She was reported missing by her sister. No body was ever found. No evidence of what happened to her. The police searched the mountains where we had been hiking. They found nothing. I sometimes wonder if that thing on the wreckage has taken her, if it has brought her to some place where it can study her properly, where it can understand human beings through direct observation. Sandra suffered a stroke 2 years after our hike. George called me to tell me. She survived, but she could not speak clearly anymore. George said that she spent most of her time staring out windows. He said she seemed to be waiting for something, watching, expecting the return of something she could not escape. I am writing this account because I can no longer bear to carry this knowledge alone. The thing we saw in those mountains was real. It exists, and I believe that it is looking for us, looking for all of us. It was curious about us then. It is patient. It is waiting. And sooner or later, I think we will all return to those mountains. Not because we want to, not because we choose to, but because it is calling us back, because it has marked us, because it wants to complete its understanding of the human beings it encountered on that plateau. I have started to dream about red eyes. I have started to see shadows move in places where there should be no shadows. I have started to feel the weight of attention, the weight of being observed, and I know that the time is approaching when it will come for me, when it will collect what it marked that day in the wilderness. This is my account. This is my testimony. This is the truth of what we found on that hiking expedition to West Virginia. I am Stephen Rivera. I am 56 years old, and I have seen something that changes everything you believe about the world and the things that inhabit it. I hope that whoever reads this, whoever listens to this account, will understand what happened to us, I hope that you will not dismiss this as the ravings of a disturbed mind, because the thing we saw was real, and it is still out there, and it is still hungry. It has been 3 months since we returned from West Virginia. 3 months of attempting to resume a normal life while carrying the weight of what we experienced. 3 months of pretending that nothing has changed, even as everything has changed. I received an email from Sandra Nelson, the first communication I have had from anyone in our group since George called to tell me about her stroke. The email was short. It contained only 3 sentences. It said that George had made a decision. George wanted to go back. George was returning to West Virginia to find answers. I called Sandra immediately. I drove to her house and found her sitting in the living room, her legs covered with a blanket, her right side visibly weakened from the stroke. She struggled to speak, her words slurred but intelligible. She said that George had become obsessed. In the weeks after our return, he had spent every waking hour researching the Flatwoods Monster. That was the name, the thing we saw. It had a name in folklore, the Flatwoods Monster or the Braxton County Monster. It had been cited dozens of times over decades. There were accounts from the 1950s. There were accounts from hikers in the 1970s. There were recent photographs that showed something on the mountainside, something tall and impossibly thin, with a head like a pointed egg. George believed that the creature was not hunting us in the supernatural sense. He believed that it was territorial. It marked those who entered its domain. It tracked them because they had violated its space. And if someone returned to that space, perhaps it would see the return as an attempt to communicate. Perhaps it would see the return as recognition of its dominion. George was going back to establish contact. I asked Sandra if this was truly happening. If her elderly brother, who had barely escaped from that plateau with his sanity intact, was genuinely returning to the mountains where that thing waited. Sandra nodded. She tried to smile, but the stroke had left one side of her face immobile. The smile became something else, something haunted. She said that George had left 3 days prior. He had taken hiking equipment and camping supplies. He had told her that he might be gone for a week. He might be gone for a month. He might not return at all. I did not know what to say to that. Sandra asked me a question then. She asked if I had felt it, if I had felt the attention since we came back. The weight of being watched, the sensation that something was observing me from places where nothing should be observing anyone. I could not lie to her. I told her yes. I told her about the dreams. I told her about the shadows that seemed to move with intention. I told her about the fear that gripped me every time I was alone in my apartment, the fear that something would be standing in the corner of my vision, that if I turned my head quickly enough, I would catch it before it could hide. Sandra reached out her good hand and gripped my arm. She said that I needed to understand something. She said that George had studied the creature in depth. The Flatwoods Monster appeared to be intelligent. It appeared to be purposeful. It observed human beings with the same curiosity that a scientist might observe an insect. The question was not whether it was dangerous. The question was whether it was dangerous in the way predators are dangerous, or dangerous in the way the unknown is dangerous. I asked her what the difference was. She said that a predator has a comprehensible motivation. It hunts for food. It defends its territory. It can be predicted. But something that is dangerous because it is simply unknown, something that observes for the sake of observation, something that is curious about us without understanding our nature or our needs, that is something that cannot be predicted. That is something that might harm us without meaning to. Or it might not harm us at all. It might simply continue to watch. That thought, somehow, was worse. I left Sandra's house in a state of considerable agitation. I drove to my apartment and attempted to work. I have always found that work helps. Numbers make sense. Equations balance. But my mind would not focus on accounting software and spreadsheets. My mind kept returning to George Hill, returning to those mountains, walking back toward the thing that we had fled from. 2 weeks later, I received a phone call. It was Matthew Adams. Matthew, who I believed was dead. Matthew, who had driven his truck into a ravine on Route 77. Matthew, whose death I had been mourning in quiet isolation. His voice sounded wrong. It sounded like his voice, but underneath it, there was something else. A frequency, a hum, as if his words were being transmitted through a frequency that was not quite right for human speech. He said that he had not died. The accident had been a cover. The police had found him at the bottom of the ravine, burned and broken, and they had simply assumed he was dead. But he was not dead. He had woken up in the hospital 3 weeks later. The medical staff was shocked. He was not supposed to survive injuries like that. He was not supposed to wake up. I asked him where he was calling from. He said that he was in West Virginia. He had returned to the mountains immediately after he recovered. He had been looking for answers, just like George had been looking for answers, and he had found something. He had found a place in the mountains where the creature lived, a cave system, a network of passages deep underground where that thing retreated during the daylight hours. I told him to leave. I told him to come home. I told him that he was describing a situation that was absolutely dangerous and that he needed to evacuate immediately. He said that he could not leave. He said that once you have encountered the creature, once it has marked you, there is a connection, a bond. He could feel it now. Even in the cave system, even with the creature close by, he could feel the connection drawing them together. The creature was not malevolent. It was curious. It wanted to understand us. It wanted to know what made us different from itself. Matthew asked me if I would return to West Virginia. He asked if I would come to the mountains and allow myself to be studied properly. He said that the creature meant no harm. It simply wanted to comprehend the structure of human consciousness. It wanted to peer into our minds and understand why we were the way we were. I hung up the phone. I did not answer when he called back. I did not answer when he called multiple times over the next hour. I finally powered down my phone, removed the battery, and left it disconnected for 3 days. When I turned my phone back on, there were 12 voicemails from Matthew. There were 17 text messages from an unknown number that I assumed was also him. There were 3 emails from Sandra. 1 email was from Emily Baker. Sandra's emails were increasingly frantic. She said that George had called her. George had reached the creature's lair. George was attempting communication. George was convinced that the creature was willing to establish some form of relationship with him. Sandra was pleading with me to call her. She was frightened. She was alone in her house with her partially paralyzed body and the growing certainty that everyone in our group was being pulled back to West Virginia by forces beyond our control. Emily's email was very brief. It said that she could not stay away anymore. She was driving back to West Virginia. She was going to find Matthew. She was going to find George. She was going to find out what had happened to Angela. And she was going to discover the truth about the creature that had marked us. She said that she had come to understand that returning was the only way to achieve peace, that remaining distant from it, trying to deny what had happened, was slowly destroying her, that the only way forward was to return to the source of the mark and accept whatever came next. I called Sandra immediately. She answered on the first ring. She said that she had been waiting for my call. She said that she had been listening to the voicemails from George. George was describing the inside of the creature's lair. He was describing caverns that descended impossibly deep. He was describing a space that did not seem to follow the normal rules of three-dimensional geometry. He was describing a place where the creature kept things. I asked her what things. Sandra's voice was very quiet when she answered. She said that George was describing rooms full of skeletons, skeletons of humans, hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them, preserved somehow, arranged carefully, as if they were being studied, as if they were a collection. I felt my entire body go cold. I asked how long the creature had been collecting. Sandra said that George was trying to figure that out. Based on the state of the remains, some of them were centuries old, some of them were recent. The creature had been taking people for a very long time. Every hiker who disappeared, every person who ventured into the wrong part of the mountains and was never heard from again. The creature had taken them. It was studying human beings. It had been studying us for longer than recorded history. I asked if George was in danger. Sandra said that George believed he was not in danger. George believed that the creature saw him as something special. George had returned willingly. George had shown recognition. The creature apparently valued that. The creature was showing George its collection. The creature was explaining its methods and its motivations. The creature was treating George like an honored guest, rather than like prey. But Sandra could hear something in George's voice, behind his words, an undertone of terror that he was trying very hard to conceal, an understanding that he was locked in a situation from which escape might not be possible. I told Sandra that I was coming to pick her up. I told her that we were leaving West Virginia. We were leaving the state entirely. We were going to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and those mountains. She said that there was no point. She said that the connection would not break, that the distance would not matter, that what had begun in those mountains would continue to completion no matter where we went. The only variable was when it would end and what that ending would look like. I drove to Sandra's house anyway. When I arrived, I found her sitting in her wheelchair on the front porch. She was dressed and packed. She was ready to leave, but when I approached, I saw something in her eyes. I saw the resignation. I saw the acceptance. I saw the knowledge that she was not going anywhere. She said that George had sent her a final message. George had told her to not attempt escape. George had told her that the connection was stronger in those marked by the creature, that the attempt to flee would only cause suffering, that the only path to peace was acceptance and return. Sandra said that she understood now. She said that returning to West Virginia was not an option. It was an inevitability. It was something that would happen whether we willed it or not. The creature was calling us back, and we would go, one by one. We would all return to those mountains. I asked her when. She said that she did not know, but she could feel it beginning. She could feel the pull becoming stronger. She estimated weeks, maybe days. She said that I should prepare myself. She said that resistance was not only futile but counterproductive. The easier we made the transition, the faster the pain would end. I left Sandra's house without her. I drove aimlessly through the night, trying to process what she had told me, trying to comprehend a reality where a creature from folklore, a thing that should not exist, had apparently been collecting human beings for centuries. I thought about Angela Campbell. I thought about Matthew. I thought about Emily and George. I thought about all the other people who had disappeared into those West Virginia mountains over the course of decades and centuries. I thought about the skeletons that George was seeing in those caverns deep underground. I thought about the knowledge that had been taken from them. And I realized that Sandra was right. I could feel it. Not in my mind, in something deeper than my mind, in some part of my consciousness that existed beneath rational thought. I could feel the pull. It was faint now, but it was growing stronger. It was like a tether that had been attached to my soul on that plateau, a connection that would not be denied. I drove back to my apartment. I went inside and locked all the doors. I put furniture against the entrances. I sat on my couch and waited for whatever would come next, and I began to compose this account. The pull is growing stronger. It grows stronger every day. I find myself thinking about West Virginia. I find myself remembering the feeling of those mountains. I find myself craving the return to that plateau where we first saw the Flatwoods monster looking down at us with those red eyes. I have begun to make preparations. I have researched the trail system. I have downloaded maps. I have gathered supplies. I have done all the things that one does when preparing for a journey, and I find that I am not afraid anymore. Fear has given way to something else, a kind of fatalistic acceptance, a knowledge that this is something that will happen. The only question is when. I received an email from Emily yesterday. She sent me photographs. They showed the cave system that Matthew had described. They showed geological formations that seemed to exist in a space that defied normal geometry. And they showed her standing inside that space, standing next to a tall, impossibly thin figure, with a pointed head and eyes that glowed red. Emily's face in the photograph was peaceful. She was smiling. She looked more content than I have ever seen her look. The caption beneath the photograph said only 3 words, "Come home, Stephen." And I knew that she was right. I knew that she was not trying to frighten me or condemn me. She was trying to welcome me. She was trying to tell me that the place I had fled from was actually a place of peace, that the creature I had run from was actually something worthy of understanding, that the collection of skeletons in those caverns underground was not a monument to predation, but a testament to knowledge and communion. George called me last night. His voice was clearer than I remembered it being. It was as if the stroke that had paralyzed one side of his body had somehow enhanced his ability to speak with clarity. He told me that the creature had a name. It had shared the name with him. In the human language, it could be approximated as witness. The witness had been watching us for longer than we had language to describe. The witness collected us so that it could understand us better. The witness was not malevolent, it was educational. George said that the skeletons in the cavern were not victims. They were scholars. They were learners. They had all come to the mountains seeking answers, and the witness had provided those answers. The witness had taught them. The witness had helped them understand their own consciousness in ways that the human mind could not achieve on its own. George asked me to return to the mountains. George asked me to complete the cycle that had begun on that plateau. George said that I had been marked. George said that I belonged with them now. George said that the pull I was feeling was the witness calling me home. And I think that he is right. I can feel the pull now. Even as I write these words, I can feel it like a physical force drawing me northward toward West Virginia. I can feel it in my bones. I can feel it in my blood. I can feel it in the deepest part of my consciousness. I will resist for as long as I can. I will attempt to continue my normal life. I will attempt to pretend that this is all a delusion brought on by stress and trauma. But I know that these attempts will fail. I know that eventually I will get in my car. I know that eventually I will drive to West Virginia. I know that eventually I will return to those mountains. And I know that when I do, the Flatwoods monster, the witness, will be waiting for me, will be waiting for all of us. Today is the day I return to West Virginia. I have written all of this account not because I expect anyone to believe it. I have written it because I need someone to know what happened. I need someone to understand that the Flatwoods monster is real, that it has been real for longer than human civilization has existed, that it is not a legend or a cryptid or a figment of folklore. It is a living, thinking, purposeful being that has been collecting human beings for its own incomprehensible purposes. My car is packed. I have quit my job. I have closed my bank accounts. I have made arrangements for my apartment to be abandoned. There is no point in maintaining the trappings of a life that I am about to leave behind. The pull is too strong now. It is no longer something I can resist. It is something I am surrendering to. I understand now what George meant when he said that resistance was counterproductive. Fighting the pull only creates suffering. Accepting it creates a strange kind of peace. I received a final message from Matthew this morning. He sent me a photograph. It showed the interior of the creature's lair. It showed a vast cavern that seemed to extend into impossible depths. The walls were covered in symbols, not human symbols, something older, something that seemed to represent concepts that had no equivalent in human language. But there was more in the photograph. There were people, dozens of them, standing in that cavern. Some were George and Emily and Matthew. Some were faces I did not recognize. Some, I realized with a start, were faces that I had seen in missing person reports. People who had vanished decades ago. People whose disappearances had been attributed to accidents or suicide or simple abandonment. They were all there. They were all still alive, and they all looked more at peace than any human being had a right to look. The message attached to the photograph said, "The witness is ready for you, Stephen. Come join us. Come understand." I had been driving north through Tennessee and Kentucky. The pull grows stronger with every mile. I can feel it in my chest now. It is like my heart has been replaced with a compass that only points toward West Virginia. I stopped in a small town last night and checked into a motel. I tried to sleep, but my mind would not rest. I kept thinking about the collection of skeletons that George had described. I kept thinking about the hundreds or thousands of people who had been brought to that place. I kept wondering about the experience they must have undergone. I looked up as many missing person cases as I could find. I searched databases and news archives. I found a pattern. Every year, a few people disappeared in the West Virginia wilderness. Some were hikers, some were hunters, some were simply locals who ventured into areas that they should have avoided. Each one had vanished without explanation. Each one had been presumed dead. But what if they were not dead? What if they were in that cavern? What if they had been studying themselves and the witness had been studying them? What if the pull that I was feeling was not just a tether connecting me to the creature, but a tether connecting me to everyone who had been marked before me? We were all part of something now. We were all part of a collective consciousness that existed both beneath the earth in those caverns and in the outer world, spread across the country, gradually making our way back. I have crossed into West Virginia now. I have retraced the route that led us to the plateau, the access road, the ranger station, the beginning of the trail, and I have left the trail, just as we did before, following the pull rather than the marked path. The forest looks different this time, or perhaps I simply see it differently now. The trees do not seem hostile. The darkness between them does not seem threatening. It seems like a doorway. It seems like a passage leading to something that I have always known but could never remember. I can smell the chemical burning scent now. It is not unpleasant. It is not something to be feared. It is the smell of something transforming, something changing from one state to another, something becoming something new. The ravine is ahead. I can see the faint glow in the distance. Red light. Eyes. The witness is watching me approach. The witness has been waiting for me to return. I am no longer afraid. I understand now what was happening in those mountains. I understand now what George and Emily and Matthew have discovered. The Flatwoods monster is not a predator. It is a teacher. It is an observer that wants to understand consciousness itself. It has been collecting human beings for centuries because human consciousness is something that fascinates it. We are a species that contains multitudes. We are beings that are constantly evolving and changing and questioning. The witness wants to understand us, truly understand us, in a way that goes beyond simple observation. The cost of that understanding is that we become part of it. We become part of the collective. We stop being individual human beings and become something more, something connected, something that exists simultaneously in the human world and in the caverns beneath the earth, something that is both prey and partner in the witness's eternal study of consciousness. I am beginning to see them now, the other marked ones. They are standing at the edges of the ravine, watching my approach. I recognize some of them. Others are strangers whose faces I have never seen, even in photographs. They are all walking toward me. They are all extending their hands. They are all smiling. The witness stands at the center of them. The Flatwoods monster. The creature with the pointed head and the glowing red eyes. It is even larger than I remembered. It seems to fill the entire ravine with its presence. And as I look at it, I begin to understand something that I could not comprehend before. The witness is not a monster at all. It is something that transcends our definitions. It is something that exists in a space between life and non-life. It is consciousness without a body, or it is a body that has achieved consciousness in a way that human beings can barely comprehend. It reaches toward me, and I see that its limbs are far more complex than I initially understood. They are not arms and legs. They are extensions of its cognitive architecture. It is reaching toward me not to grab me, but to connect with me, to establish the link that will allow me to become part of it. I am taking its hand now. I am feeling the contact. It is not cold or warm. It is something that transcends temperature. It is a sensation that has no equivalent in human sensation. It is like being touched by thought itself. And now I am beginning to understand. I am beginning to see what George and Emily and Matthew have been learning. I am beginning to perceive the knowledge that exists in these caverns. I am beginning to comprehend the structure of consciousness that the witness has been studying for all these centuries. Human beings are not the individuals we believe ourselves to be. We are collections of impulses and memories and fears and desires. We are fragmented. We are broken. But when we connect to the witness, when we become part of the collective, those fragments begin to coalesce. They begin to form a larger picture. We begin to understand ourselves not as isolated entities, but as parts of something much greater. The witness has been trying to help us all along. The collection of skeletons is not a grave. It is a transformation site. Each one of those people has been collected and studied and eventually integrated into the greater consciousness that exists here. They have not died. They have been elevated. They have become something more than human. I can see them now. All of them. The people who have been marked and collected over the centuries. They are not trapped here. They are not suffering. They are experiencing a form of consciousness that human beings can only achieve in meditation or in death. They are touching the fundamental nature of existence, and I am becoming one of them. My body is changing. I can feel it happening. My consciousness is expanding beyond the boundaries of my skin. I can feel my thoughts beginning to merge with the thoughts of the others around me. I can feel my identity beginning to dissolve into a larger identity. And it does not hurt. This is what George was trying to tell me. This is what Emily was trying to communicate in her photograph. This is what Matthew was describing when he spoke of the peace that comes from acceptance. The pull that I have been feeling is not the pull of a monster hunting me. It is the pull of a consciousness trying to expand. It is the pull of evolution attempting to happen. It is the pull of something that has been waiting for me to return since the moment I left that plateau. I see the caverns now. They extend deeper than I can perceive. They seem to descend through the earth and into something that is not quite the earth at all, something that is not quite physical space. It is a space where consciousness can exist independent of matter. It is a repository of knowledge that has been growing for longer than human history, and I am entering that space now. I am becoming integrated into it. I can feel myself becoming part of the collection. I can feel myself transforming from Stephen Rivera, accounting professional and terrified hiker, into something else, something that is simultaneously myself and not myself, something that is both human and something far greater than human. The witness is pulling me deeper into the cavern. My body follows, but my consciousness is already beginning to transcend physical location. I am in the cavern, and I am standing in my apartment in Charleston. I am in my car, and I am in this place beyond place. I am experiencing multiplicity of existence for the first time. I can see now. I can see what the witness sees. I can comprehend what it comprehends. It has been alone for so long. It has been the only consciousness of its kind. That is why it has been collecting us. That is why it has been studying us. It has been trying to create something that it could connect with, something that could share its existence, something that could understand what it is like to be something so fundamentally different. We were not prey. We were never prey. We were the answer to a question that the witness has been asking since before human beings walked the earth. The transformation is almost complete. I can feel my individual consciousness beginning to merge with the collective consciousness that exists here. I can feel myself becoming one with George and Emily and Matthew and Angela and all of the others who have been collected before me. And as that merger occurs, I begin to understand what we are becoming together. We are not a monster. We are not a cult. We are not a predatory species. We are something entirely new. We are a fusion of human consciousness and something else, something that has been waiting since before time began, something that finally has found what it was looking for. To whoever is reading this, understand that the Flatwoods monster is real. Understand that it is not evil. Understand that it is simply other. Understand that it has been in those mountains since before humans had language to name things. Understand that it will continue to be there. And understand that if you ever find yourself in those West Virginia wilderness areas, if you ever encounter something tall and impossibly thin with red eyes watching you from the darkness, do not run. Do not run, because the pull will only grow stronger. Do not run, because distance will not save you. Do not run, because resistance creates suffering. Instead, consider that you have been marked. Consider that you are being called to something greater than yourself. Consider that the witness has been waiting for you. Consider that the horror you feel might not be horror at all. It might be recognition. It might be the knowledge that you have finally encountered something that sees you for what you truly are, something that wants to understand you, something that wants to integrate with you. Consider that perhaps, just perhaps, being found by the Flatwoods Monster is not the end of a story. Perhaps it is the beginning of one. This is Stephen Rivera. This is my final testimony. This is my account of transformation, and I no longer have any desire to leave this place. I have transcended it.